eternal existence in the Supreme, then one is supposed to be mukta, moksha, and one attains that state of immortality, you might say. Now, Sri Aurobindo maintains that the soul, this is very much like in the Bhagavad Gita, where the Jivatman is described as para prakritir jiva bhuta. And another statement where Sri Krishna says that jiva is mama eva ansha sanatanaha. That jiva, or the soul, is my eternal portion. Mama eva ansha sanatanaha. Now these two statements are the key to Sri Aurobindo's description of the individual. Each one of us is an individual here on the earth and developing from stage to stage. And when he realizes, when the soul realizes his oneness or his being a portion of the Supreme, then he realizes his immortality, and that is moksha. In this respect, Sri Aurobindo's view of moksha is not different very largely from many views of moksha which are prevalent in India. But Sri Aurobindo finds this idea further developed in the Veda, and this concept of physical being experiencing its wideness and upheld by Aditi is also accepted by Sri Aurobindo when he speaks of three other immortalities: mental immortality, vital immortality, and physical immortality. The mental immortality, according to Sri Aurobindo, is the immortality of the mental being when that mental being on its surface becomes individualized by the power of the psychic consciousness, soul consciousness or psychic consciousness. That is to say, each psychic being or each individual has an individual consciousness. This individual consciousness is not normally reflected in our mental, vital and physical being. Our mental formation is a fluctuating development. Our mind develops, grows, and then it disintegrates sometimes integrates, sometimes our memories fail, and even in this body itself, our mind becomes disintegrated. Similarly, our life force also becomes disintegrated from time to time, again repaired. Body also gets disintegrated, repaired, and so on. Now, all this happens because, according to Sri Aurobindo, there is a double movement in the world. There is a movement by which our small little formations constantly strive to become as universal as possible. This is the fundamental process of growth. All our formations attempt to grow as far as possible and try to become as universal as possible. Normally, our movement of universality comes about by external expansion. Even in mental being, I come to get this information, that information, further information, and further information, and I feel that now I have a large body of information. And then I try to do still more and still more. In this way I try to grow in my mind. It's an attempt to become as universal as possible. Now, according to Sri Aurobindo, this is an external process of growth which is very helpful, but by no means of constant expansion of this kind can you really be universalized. There is an inner way of becoming universal, and that is to say, to discover your true individual. Not the egoistic consciousness, but the true individual, which is much deeper, which Sri Aurobindo calls the psychic being and the psychic entity within us. That psychic entity within us is a manifestation of the Jivatman, that which is the eternal portion of the Supreme. It is eternal, and since it is an eternal portion, it is immortal, and its manifestation is therefore immortal. It's the true individual which is immortal. Now, even to recognize this individual immortality is a very difficult process. Normally we are external consciousness, we are bahirmukha, we are not antarmukha. And that is why it is very difficult for us to become aware of our true psychic entity and psychic being. According to Sri Aurobindo, the yoga is largely to be concentrated on the growth of our body, life and mind externally as much as possible. In this growth, many forces are at work and many cosmic beings are at work. And these cosmic beings are what the Veda calls the gods. So in the process of growth and development, we can take the help of the gods and they can increase our body, life and mind. We become increased, as it were. This is the word vardhamana. You constantly go on increasing. Now, this increasing goes on until a point is reached when we begin to become aware of an internal being in us, of which body, life and mind are partial expressions or partial instruments. The process by which you begin to become aware of that individuality is the central part of the yoga. Outer growth of the body, life and mind is also yoga, but it is the preliminary, you might say. But when you begin to become aware of that internal part of our being, our psychic entity, turning towards it and trying to catch it, as it were, that is the internal part, the central part of yoga. Now, how to become aware of this psychic entity is a very big question, and it's been dealt with at length in Sri Aurobindo's literature, how to become aware of the psychic being. But if one becomes aware of the psychic being, then one is able to reflect the powers of the psychic being in the body, life and mind. This is what is called the process of psychicization of the body, life and mind. It's a long process, and it's a great process of yoga, and the processes are full of perils of many kinds, because between the outer body, life and mind and the psychic being, there are many kingdoms of the universal mind, universal life, universal matter, and if you enter into them, it's a long process. In fact, Sri Aurobindo in his Savitri, he has devoted several cantos to this description. There is a very important canto in Sri Aurobindo's Savitri, Search of the Soul. That is to say, Savitri at a certain stage of her yoga enters into the search of the soul. And Sri Aurobindo describes this search of the soul and describes in detail, which is a very illuminating chapter in Savitri. And there, as a preliminary of entry into the psychic consciousness or soul consciousness, there is a description of what Sri Aurobindo calls the travel in the inner kingdoms. When you turn inward, then there are many inner kingdoms you come across, and these inner kingdoms also have to be crossed, and then you enter into psychic consciousness. So the true individual is, as Kathopanishad and Sri Aurobindo confirms this experience of Kathopanishad, that there is in us a being which is seated in the deep cave of the heart. Hridaya Guhayam. It is in the deep cave of the heart, and to enter into the deep cave of the heart is a long process. You might say that Kathopanishad is a very secret teaching. And in fact, the question which has been asked by Nachiketas as to whether man remains or man does not remain after the death, and then answer of Yama is a long answer. And it is not merely the statement that yes, there is a man who lives after the death. That is actually not basically, as Sri Aurobindo points out, that since Nachiketas reached Yama after death, there was no question in his mind whether one lives after death or not. He knows that, but that was not his question. His question is whether there is a real immortality. To remain survival after the death is one kind of existence, not necessarily immortal. But his question was, there is a real immortality or not? And it is that question. And then Kathopanishad says, yes, there is an immortal reality of which it describes. But if you read it closely, you'll find in Kathopanishad, several times it says, etad vai tat. There are several times Yama ends by saying, etad vai tat. And if you analyze it, he describes all that is immortal, not only the Supreme Being that is immortal. And he says, you ask me what is immortal, is there immortal or not? So he says, this was your question and I am giving that answer, etad vai tat. Aditi is also described there as that which is immortal. The soul is also described as that which is immortal. Gods also are described as which are immortal. So, actually, Kathopanishad is a wonderful statement of the science of or knowledge of immortality. And Sri Aurobindo confirms all that. In fact, if you read the Life Divine closely, you will find all the statements confirmed. And then this particular experience of the entry into the